Welcome to It Starts With You, where we cut through the noise and get real about the behaviours that shape our lives, both personally and professionally. I'm Vic O'Farrell. Let's jump in because behaviours start with you. And here we are on another episode of It Starts With You. And today I am delighted to be joined by Frank. And we met through the Professional Speaking Association. But Frank's not your average motivational speaker, climbed Everest or lost a limb or those kind of big motivational speakers. No, Frank comes from quite a dark space, is how I'm going to describe it, Frank. But if you'd like to tell the listeners and viewers what it is that you do, maybe your book as well, that kind of stuff, and then we'll go from there and we'll talk about those kind of behaviours.
Yeah, lovely to see you again. Yes, and we did meet via the PSA and have met very many interesting people, taken some of their influences on board along the way. Did feel a little bit out of my depth at times because you're all very professional. And I thought I was going to be the Cockney wide boy that was going to come along. Here's my business card, give me some work. And then it suddenly dawned on me, no, these are very professional people. Yeah, but I am Frank Portinari. I live in Camden, lived in Camden all my life. I currently conduct a walking tour around Camden, which is called the dark side of Camden, which is ironic because so much of my life, as you said yourself, is quite dark. Um, but I do include myself in the tour. There is, I don't hide from my past. But yeah, that's something I wish I'd discovered a lot sooner in life. If I'm honest, because I'm meeting people, I'm educating people. I always introduce it as being the four Fs. I say there's fact, there's fiction, there's folklore, and there's Frank. So you can choose which you
Yeah.
want to take home with you at the end of the day.
Yeah. Um, oh, I don't want you to take Frank home because he's going home to Lisa.
Oh
Miss.
no, I'm not for hire.
Yeah. Okay, well let's talk about this Camden walking tour, which I have been on. And as you can tell just from Frank's accent, he is born and bred East End London boy. So can I say you've had the criminality part of your life,
Mm.
which is what the whole of the Dark Side of Camden walking tour is about. I mean, I come into King's Cross and Pancras and I walk over to Euston and then I suddenly realise I've actually walked through some places where some very dark things have happened, and you do talk all about those. Do you mind? Let's share the first one, which is where we stop and you tell us about your story, Frank, because I'm sure people who are listening and watching would will be asking themselves, "Ooh, what did Frank do?"
Yeah, well, we were up probably quarter of the way through the tour. It's gone from 2 hours to 3 hours now because I had a lot of social history as well now, which I'm learning all the time. So I clearly want to share that with people. But we arrive at a school just at the back of Camden Town Underground Station. And I tell the story of a schoolkeeper. I don't mention his name. I mention the schoolkeeper who was arrested in a car park at the back of a pub in Birmingham. It was 1993, and within the back of his car was a bag, and it had seven handguns, semi-automatic handguns, and 240 rounds of ammunition. Another chap pulled up in another car. The bag was handed over, and as we went to walk away, two men approached, and I wasn't going to get out of my way, and I almost went to say, "Get out the bleeding way," for a polite way of putting it. And they both opened their coats, and they had Heckler and Koch machine guns. So this was the police. We basically been caught. At that time, I was a senior member of the Ulster Defence Association. So this was at the height of the Troubles, back in 1993. I was a sworn-in member of the Ulster Defence Association, and I was in charge of London, basically. It was an operation that had gone wrong. Someone had taken those weapons on the Saturday. The chap from Belfast meant to pick them up, He went to the wrong location. They were brought back to me on the Sunday. Broke my own rules. Always say never lose your temper. Be calm. Think it through. As an act, out of an act of frustration, Bank Holiday Monday, I took the weapons. And I'm going to qualify that by saying I'm glad I got caught. I'm very glad I got caught on that day, because I've said many, many times, you can't be in charge and have guns wrapped around you and not eventually use them. And there were certainly plans, not just necessarily to use those particular weapons, but other weapons. So it did stop me in my tracks, and that needed to be done. But there's an explanation how it led to it, how I got there in the first place.
You did get caught, you say, and you did serve time for that. But just tell us again where we stop on the tour.
Mm.
Is it the school?
Yeah, so I'd say it's the schoolkeeper. So that's who we're talking about. I'd say that the school, that's where he lived as well, on site, with his wife and 2 daughters. But I don't actually tell them that it's me at the time. But of course, as we go to leave the site, I do make a point of saying, and he now does a walking tour in Camden, which clearly gets people's attention. Sometimes they wait to the end of the tour, and we'll have a pint together, and they'll say, "Is that you?" And I'll say, "Yeah." And I'm quite open, and I answer any of their quite a bit answer any of their questions.
And so that is the part, and because I remember saying to you, there was that. Are you talking about yourself here, Frank? But let's look at this, because this is obviously, it starts with you, and it's about behaviours. And I'm not at all saying, please, listeners and viewers, judge every schoolkeeper with these eyes, but it's not the behaviour that you would expect from somebody in such a position to also be part of I'm just going to use the term gang. So how did you go about your day work as a schoolkeeper, also knowing that you had a very dark side to your life? How could you wear 2 completely different lives?
Well, yes, it is. There is lots of contradictions throughout my life. Anyway, if you start talking about a kid that went to Sunday school, clearly knew right from wrong, clearly had a respect for life. It is very contradictory. I've been a football hooligan, looking back on it now. If someone said to me, "Oh, thanks to you, my dad stopped taking me to football back in the 70s or the 80s, or whenever," I wouldn't be very proud of that. We can all make excuses and say, "Oh, well, we only ever fought with people that wanted to, fight with each other," but we must have ruined somebody else's day in the process. So it's not something I agree with, yet I've been an active part of it.
But you say now that it's not something that you're proud of, or yet you were at the time.
Oh, without a doubt, because I'd had 2 fathers. Neither of, I think my first father left when I was about 2. The other one, he meant well, but he wanted my mother. He didn't want me. He had schizophrenia. He used to scare the life out of me. I spent more time out of the house than in the house. I radiated towards other people's fathers. I was very envious that they had a dad, if you like. And, for want of a better way of putting it, local gangs were my family. They were like my brothers. So, and especially when I was in older company, I would act that much older to try and, to compensate.
How did you get into the gang in the first place?
Well, that came through politics. I started off when I was a teenager as a young socialist. We lived in a very poor community. It made sense when people came knocking on the door and started talking about bad housing, education, unemployment, health, etc. It didn't take a lot for someone from a working class family to identify with that. Probably about a year, I did challenge that, and my friend said, "Look, it's the football or the politics." It was always going to be the football. And 2-3 years later, somebody came into the pub, gave me a leaflet. And before I knew it, if 1 minute I'd been a left-wing activist, and the next minute I was a right-wing activist. And through that's when I started to learn about Northern Ireland, read much more, met people from the, almost, I suppose, refugees to a certain degree, people that had left Belfast and different towns, worked with them, became friends with them. Then friends of theirs would be imprisoned, or family members. They'd be killed via a bomb, or a direct assassin. It became very, very personal. And this is where I'm going to introduce the phrase the treadmill, because I've learned since that my life has been one of getting on a treadmill, pressing the green button to go, and not looking left, not looking right, not looking behind me, just going forward. And the more responsibility that I took on, you lose yourself, because you're not you anymore. You're working for other people. I'm somebody who I say I don't like barstool preachers, and I've got friends to this day, 40 years later, still complaining about the same thing. And I'm someone that says if I'm going to do it, I go and do it. Well, once you've deposed people who you've regarded as being fraudulent, you can't go back on that. You have to show, well, you just got rid of this fella. Now you've got to be in charge. I didn't necessarily ask to be, but I was certainly put forward to. So again, when I pressed the red button and got off the treadmill, you then only start to question, well, why did I get on there? What were the mechanisms in place if something went wrong? Why did somebody else get on there? Why was it you that was encouraged to get on it? But once I wrote the book, I could identify so many things. So many things I hadn't noticed before. And it's extremism. It's everything I do tends to go to extremes.
Right. Okay. So that's a worrying behavior to have, but the fact that you recognize that. Can I just bring in Lisa here? So for those listening, Lisa is Frank's wife, and you've been married over 50 years now, haven't you? I do follow you on socials. I've met your lovely wife.
Yeah, we met when we were 15. So last week that would have been 53 years. Yeah.
So you met her when you were 15. You weren't as part of the Ulster Defence Union.
Oh no, that
weren't into any of this.
No.
So if I asked Lisa how your behaviours have changed over the years, what would she say about Frank?
Complex is her favourite word. I even asked her this morning, I said, when I get asked what would wrap it all up, if you like, she said, complex, Frank. You're very, very complex. So I know that to be true, yeah.
And she is still, after everything that you've done, you are still married. Our social shows it very happily married.
Yeah, very.
What happened when you went inside in prison? What was the behaviours of your marriage then?
I was a category A prisoner for 9 months. So when she first came to see me, it was behind a screen. It was very serious. She wasn't part of the general population.
So can you just explain to viewers and listeners the difference that you say category A? I know because I've given talks in prison, but could you just explain what that is?
Well, category A, you're thought of as basically having the means to escape. It can be you're a dangerous prisoner. It could be you're a danger to other prisoners. It could be a danger to the staff. But generally speaking, it's if you have the means or the capacity to escape. So I was on a wing of 16 cells, but only 8 cells were ever used at any one time, because every so many days they move you from one cell to another. So you couldn't plan to escape even if you wanted to. Back in 1993, it was very austere. It was freezing cold cells, 1 shower a week if you were lucky. It was still slopping out. I remember looking at a plastic bucket under the sink and swore by it I would never, demean myself and use that bucket. Well, after 4 days, you use the bucket. Your food gets brought to the door. You couldn't go to the library, no gym. As I say, it was the last bastion, as they said, of the POA, the Prison Officers Association, which is fine. I'd committed a crime, even if some people consider it, oh, well, it was what you believed in. But it was still breaking the law. And she came the first time, and I said, look, maybe this isn't the best. It's only 15 minutes. It's coming a long way. It's costing money. And we finally got an open visit after a couple of months. You still got two officers sitting, in quite close proximity. And that's when I said, I'm glad I got caught. And she said, why? Why would you want to get caught? I said, well, where do you think this was leading to? And she said something like, do you think you're trying to tell me you'd have shot somebody? I don't think I ever answered. I think I shrugged my shoulders or pulled an expression. But I needed to get that off my chest.
Let's hit pause so I can tell you how I work with leaders and teams to turn behaviour into results. Have you got a panel session coming up? Panel guests should do more than just fill the time. They should spark change. I bring fresh, practical insights that challenge thinking and inspire action. It starts with you, and together we'll make it happen.
She was amazing, absolutely amazing. On remand, you can come. You could come a couple of times a week. When in 1993, it was £70 every trip, so she was spending £140, not including cabs even, probably, from New Street and so on. No, she was amazing. She was absolutely amazing. And to the degree at that stage, I didn't even have a wedding ring. And she said, I want you to have a wedding ring. And for want of a better way of putting it, she broke the law. I told her to put it on her finger, hand it to me when we were saying goodbye. And I got caught with that. I actually got caught with that ring. When I came home, it was a new home, completely refurnished, But between her and the children, what I can never get back. So I say this to people. So I can go into clubs now and pubs and places and say people shake my hand, buy me a drink, pat me on the back, want a photo done. It means absolutely nothing to me because I've missed birthdays, first days at school, funerals, weddings, so many anniversaries. You're not getting those back.
No, you're not. But
No.
when you first got together with Lisa, you were 15, weren't you? You weren't in the gangs then, were you?
I blame her. I'd never broken the law.
You
Despite what her
can't
mother
blame
thought.
Lisa for your behaviours,
Well,
Frank.
despite what her mother thought, I used to say she was posh because I still lived in a house with an outside toilet and a tin bath hanging on a nail, And she had an inside toilet and a bath, so she was posh to me, and she spoke very well. So she was definitely different from the rest of the girls where I lived, that's for sure. And I thought, well, that's definitely a bit of me, but I didn't think I had any chance. So, yeah, she'd have just known. She would have just known at 15. I thought I was very mature because I'd had to be. I'd left school at 14. Should never have left school. But my family had nothing, so I left. So I promised her the world, didn't I? I mean, burger and chips in the Wimpy. What more would a girl want if she played her cards right?
Well, at least you went to the Wimpy. They had nice reports.
She got a prawn cocktail as well. So, and we would sit opposite a furniture shop and plan out what furniture we were going to buy when we lived together and so on. But I've always called her my guardian angel. Yeah. Always been a guard because my parents both landed up. One landed up in Hallowick, one landed up in Free and Barnet. I'd been in a home with my sister for a while. And she came along at a very, very difficult time. Very, very difficult time. And I think she kept me stable. I can remember when it was suggested that I go and see a doctor. And I very coldly said, well, I'm not mad, just to imply my parents were. Most of my friends would now say, Frank, maybe you should have gone and seen that doctor when you was 15,
Well, yeah, just because picking up on what you just said then, she kept you stable. Sorry, Lisa, if you're listening to this isn't disrespectful to you, but she clearly didn't because you still went on and became part of the Ulster Defence Unit and still broke the law.
Yeah, I think it's in small stages because it started off with the football. So as time went on, she was used to me going to football, home and away.
Did she know you were being a hooligan at football?
Well, I'd been arrested a few times, and quite lucky not to have been in prison. I'd had suspended sentences and so on. And then when I should have gone to prison, on that particular occasion, I actually didn't get found guilty. So it was more luck than judgment. But again, it was respect. It was the camaraderie. It was respect. So I didn't have brothers. People older than me were like older brothers. Some of them I worked with. That's how I became part of a drinking culture. That's how I met various villains along the way, who ironically supplied me with guns later in life. So I think when it went up a notch, so to speak, she was quite used to me having the same circle of friends. So if I said I was going to Belfast or Glasgow or Londonderry or Liverpool or somewhere, oh, he's off. He's probably just off with his mates, drinking and so on. So it was very easy to disguise. So, for example, if I went to Glasgow, she assumed I was going to a football match.
So
She did
Lisa
that.
had no idea
No,
of the
no,
fact that,
no.
and we talk about behaviours drive behaviours, but you were
Mm.
then being swept along in this, I call it a gang culture. I know
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
some people would think that I'm belittling it. I
No,
don't
I
know.
understand what you're saying. I understand what
It's just the fact that you was effectively living like a double life then, because you're telling Lisa one thing, yet you're going off and doing something really quite fucking horrible.
Well, she did know. I mean, at one stage, she would think it was political. Let's
Right.
just say she'd know it was political. She'd know that I'm British. I'm very proud to be British, and therefore, in that sense, I was a unionist. So, if somebody in Northern Ireland wanted to remain British, then we were blood brothers almost. So she knew that much. So if I said I was going to Glasgow to meet friends in Glasgow, she wouldn't know I was planning to have a consignment of guns going over on a boat to
Mm.
Belfast, because
Yeah.
then I certainly wasn't going to tell her that.
No,
But I
you're
think
implicating her that way.
in later life, she did say to me there were certain signs, and my mother very coldly one day blamed her for me being imprisoned, and she did apologise afterwards. I hasten to add, um, but I always say if if Lisa had told me what to do, like a lot of mums, they'd have said, "You can't tell my son what to do." And I think so. She had time to think that one through, and she did it. She did apologise.
Yeah, I think Lisa deserves more than a medal, really, doesn't she? You obviously
Mm.
there's some true love there is what there is.
Well, I would qualify the fact that she was my say girlfriend at 15, and that's been consistent. There's never been a breakup. We've been parted certainly, and in some respects that almost enforced the bond even more. Because that the distance, what you've taken for granted before. But there's so many contradictions.
Yeah. And so so coming out of prison from when you were arrested
Mm.
as a school keeper, you I haven't actually. I did we ask talk about it on the walk? Did you lost your job?
Lost a job, lost the house, lost the car. Yeah, it
Because
took some
that
getting.
all came with it, didn't it, as part of the
Oh
job? So,
yeah,
so
yeah.
how did you suddenly just pick yourself up and become a law-abiding citizen? Still living in
Well,
Camden, because you are an East End boy. You ain't never gonna
mm.
go. Yeah, you ain't never gonna
well,
lose that, are you?
well, I didn't change when I came out. You see, that's the thing. There was no rehabilitation,
Hmm.
and I'd gone away. Would be termed as a loyalist prisoner,
Hmm.
and you can't get much better of a badge to wear in those circles because you've done what you said you would do. So to come out and say that's it, that's my lot, there's also a bit of what's I've done all this for nothing. Then you don't admit what you've lost, and you don't forget you've still got the same kudos. You've got even more now because you've been a prisoner.
That's
And events, sorry,
no. I was
and
going to
events,
say it's behaviour driving behaviour, isn't it? Suddenly
yeah,
you might
yeah,
have come out thinking, right, okay, I've got to change my life, but actually everyone's going, no, but Frank, you're a hero,
yeah,
so
yep,
you want to wear that badge.
yep, yep. And at the time, you don't see it. And I've said before, it wasn't until I wrote a book and then read the book and went, oh, is that me? Is that how the world sees me? Because I've not got someone with a camera following me all day and then showing me at the end of the day, Frank, this is you. This is the real you. So the funny, happy-go-lucky, jokey type bloke can be a very, very dark, serious person. And I know I have that influence over people. And I know how that can swallow people up. And I know there would be people that when I finally said, that's my lot, must have given a big sigh of relief because of the loyalty that they'd shown me through so many aspects of my life, I'm sure. And I used to get asked, oh, Frank, you've been radicalised. Are you not aware you've been radicalised? And it took me a time to realise, no. I was the one doing the radicalising. Not consciously at the time, but I can see it now. I can see it very, very clearly. It's a thing where I say, I'd make a great employee for you because I'm going to give you everything because I'm enthusiastic about it. But it can also be very debilitating as well because, every now and again I will get like what we used to discuss at the PSA, like an imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's almost like it worries me. I don't like it. So I have to go to an extreme to counter it. I can't be seen to be vulnerable, because if you've been in prison and you've had to learn to live with prison life, you cannot be vulnerable. You cannot allow yourself to be vulnerable. So you go over and beyond it to make sure everybody knows, you are not going to be a victim. So when challenges come my way, instead of probably just treating them as normal, just a bit of self-doubt or whatever, I go to the other extreme to prove that I'm not. And it's held me back. There's no doubt about it, that it's. I think there's a bit of narcissism as well thrown in for good measure, because again, that's the cancer. That's the cancer. And I sometimes think I'm a twin. I sometimes think I'm a twin, and the other body died, but I landed up with the other one's brain.
And you know what? When you talk about the extreme of one to the other, and you mentioned, I don't know whether you said it was your father or maybe your stepfather that had schizophrenia. It is actually that kind of it's like you're showing that kind of behavior. How can you be one person one day? It's like living a double life.
Yeah. I mean, when I was in prison, I was a listener. I mean, you're not a qualified counsellor, but I was a listener. I helped a hell of a lot of people. I prevented people from killing themselves in some cases. There were people that were millionaires, criminals that were millionaires, couldn't write a letter to their wives. And I'd offer to write them a letter. I did poetry, Valentine's Day for prisoners. I did all sorts of things. I made sure I was in charge of my wing for the tobacco and the phone cards, jewellery. This is from prison. This chain, budgie cages, trainers. But then people that didn't have a lot, I'd have them cook for me so that they get a meal, and then I'd give them tobacco for doing it. And I also learned it makes you a very intrinsic part of the wing, So I know my powers that I've got. I do know the skill set that I've got. But, there's a lot to look back and reflect on and wish it hadn't had to be that way. Because, as I say, there's a lot of creativity that I just have not fulfilled. And I find it very frustrating.
But don't, Frank, because you're not at the end of your life,
Oh, no. I'm not.
I mean,
I am 68 now, so I
well,
think there's more behind than in front of me.
sadly, I think that's the same for me as well. But you talk about poetry on Valentine's Day, now we're actually seeing that there is a real romantic behind you, and
a big romantic.
That's the reason that you and Lisa have been together for over.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So what was the turning point for you then that made you say enough is enough?
I think because I got involved in some community politics, and I realised you can't go around shooting everybody. You can't go around blowing everybody up. We went to the outskirts of Belfast one weekend, and this is after I'd come out of prison, and we met a group of women, and they were explaining how they couldn't go to the shops without being threatened and so on. And we thought, hold on, these people can't go and buy a loaf of bread and a pint of milk without being threatened, feeling threatened. And there was a blind lady there. We didn't know she was blind. And she described how she lived in a bungalow. And if something hit her roof, she had to distinguish between, was it a brick? Was it a petrol bomb? And we suddenly realised she was blind. And there were 20 odd of us. And there were grown men making an excuse to go to the toilets because we had tears in our eyes. So these tough men, suddenly were showing a side of them that they didn't want other people to see. And when we got back to London, I said, well, we need to do something about this. And we had a function, we raised money, and we got a container, a 40-foot container, had it converted into a shop. So somebody got a job running the shop, and people were safe. And I think that was the moment it made me think, come on, you can be active, you can be proactive. You can even take it to extremes if you want. But it's doing some good for people. It's not harming people. I think that was the start. So you're probably talking, well, let's put it this way, I was still recognised for the position that I was in. So I suppose if you want a better way of putting it, I carried people along to turn their backs on violence and be more proactive in helping the community, as opposed to where our mindset used to be defending it, physically defending it. Now it was helping it to help it defend itself and be more self-sufficient.
So from a young age, like you say, you've used the word radical, you've used the word extremist, but from a young age you were influenced by other people's behaviours because that's all you saw was the right way to go. You just saw a life. I don't say you saw a life of crime. I don't mean it in that way, but you only saw that side of the story, if you like, until you got to the stage where actually you realised the impact that you were having on others. That you
I
could.
think a lot of it was a sense of belonging. I think a lot of it was a sense, and having no brothers, not having any male cousins. I think that had a great influence on me. So when I work with older people, and I impressed them in some way, I hung on to that. Definitely, there was definitely a case of that. And then I learned that I had certain leadership skills myself. So I use that. I use those. But as I say, it was that book that done it for me. It was just. I mean, people say to me now. People will say to me, "Oh, you believed in what you did. What you were doing, and so on." And that's great. But someone said to me, "Do you class yourself as a terrorist?" And I said, "Yes, I do." Because there's no dressing it up. If I'm gonna refer to somebody else who I would have seen as the enemy, and I've referred to them as a terrorist, then I'm making out I'm some kind of anti-terrorist, because I'm opposing them. I accept that title. I don't do it to show off in front of certain circles. I do it to say no, that's just the right title for what I did. Would
Yeah,
I have done what somebody else did, but they were on the other side? Yes. Do you class them as a terrorist? Yes. Well, then you are as well. So.
yeah, but you're not now.
Oh no, 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 not at all now. And I've done a lot of talks. I've done a lot of talks.
Yeah.
I've attended things for the security industry. 300-400 people, and sat on a stage and said that I advise young men now, from whichever side of the divide it is, to go get educated, come back, help their communities, and find out that they've got more in common than what they have, against each other. And I know that I followed. Eventually, I followed a man who was a political man, but he was also a very militant man as well. And his mantra was one of nobody was exclusively right and nobody was exclusively wrong. And if we can meet in the middle and have that conversation, then we'll make some progress. And I'd like to think that's what I've been doing the last few years.
Yeah. And that's probably a good place for us to kind of bring this conversation together. I often say when I'm talking base levels of personalities, this is.
Mm.
about it, the best journey you can make is to meet someone halfway.
Mm.
And it is, it's the fact that you look back and you've re-educated yourself that it's what you were doing was wrong, and now let's do it for the good of other people. You talk about your book. Do you want to, have you got a copy of it there? Just so if people do go, oh,
Yeah,
what's your book?
that is the book. It's
Yeah.
called Left Right Loyalist, and that's to indicate that my politics went from left to right, and then eventually to loyalist. And at the bottom it says from one extreme to another, which pretty much says it. And when you just said about meeting in the middle, that's definitely something I've taken away from the PSA,
Yeah.
because I suddenly had to find myself in a room full of people that didn't necessarily think the same way as me. You know, people far more liberal, and because they were far more liberal, they listened to my story. You know, and so that also helped me to kind of reevaluate some of the things I've done as well.
Well, we go through life with our life's experiences, and our biases are made up from what we see and what we're fed in this world. So yeah, thank you for being on here. What would you, if someone's listening to this and maybe even triggered by it, or maybe they think that they've got a family member that is perhaps getting into the wrong gang of people, what advice would you give them?
I would firstly say that they, yes, certainly encourage them to have a conversation, and even if they haven't got the confidence to have the conversation with that person, or they feel that that person may not confide in them, then maybe suggest somebody else that they can talk to, because that takes me back to the listening.
Hmm.
You know, you couldn't, as I say, you want to train counsellor, you couldn't tell people what to do, but you could continue to ask questions and get them to question themselves. So yeah, if you're not capable of doing it yourself, certainly, find somebody that may be in a position to do that. Yeah, that's probably the best advice.
Communicate, start a conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, most definitely. Yeah.
And thank you for this conversation, Frank.
Thank you.
For those watching and listening, do check out the show notes. It'll have everywhere that you can get hold of Frank and that book as well. Take care, Frank.
Thank you.
Well, that's today's dose of truth. Now go make it happen, because behaviour drives behaviour, and behaviour starts with you.